The image you see in front of you is a picture of North Carolina Governor Pat McCrory. Now, if that name rings a bell for you, it's probably because this guy was the face of a state law which discriminated against, depending on your point of view, discriminated against transgender people using bathrooms. You know, big flipping deal. This guy also is the face of the Republican Party in North Carolina that was so heinous in its attempt to block minorities, specifically black people, college students, and senior citizens from exercising their right to vote. It was so bad that their own state Supreme Court knocked down and declared unconstitutional the voting restrictions that they had put in place, and indicated that the law was so heinous that it took a laser-like focus on stopping black people from voting. Now, what was not as publicized was the fact that the state appealed their own state court's decision to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court basically locked up 4-4. So, in effect, the decision stood. Now, this prick has the nerve to want to, or actually refuse to concede in an election that he lost. And he's using the excuse of voter fraud. Now, there's about 100 counties in North Carolina, and he's claiming voter fraud in half of them. And in all 50 of those particular counties, or voting districts, I should say, they are all controlled by Republicans. And the funny thing about this one is the Republicans have all stated that there is no evidence of voter fraud. These are Republicans that are saying this now. Check out this particular story.
Because 2 full weeks after Election Day, the incumbent governor, Pat McCrory, is refusing to concede. McCrory currently trails Democratic Attorney General Roy Cooper by over 6,000 votes, a deficit that has only grown since election night. Remember, this is a state where for the past few years, Democrats and a coalition of civil rights groups have been engaged in a pitched battle with the McCrory administration over a host of issues, including a discriminatory voter ID law, anti-LGBT legislation, the cutting of the social safety net, and McCrory's refusal to expand Medicaid under Obamacare, hurting some rural hospitals. And while those demonstrations, labeled Moral Mondays and the Forward Together movement, seem to have energized and convinced voters to reject the governor, Pat McCrory is refusing to go. Instead, he's challenging the vote count in over half of the state's 100 counties, alleging, you guessed it, voter fraud. Allegations that have so far been rejected by county boards that have looked into the claims. This morning, the state's 2 largest newspapers weighed in. The Raleigh News and Observer said that the failed vote challenges show it's time for McCrory to concede, while the Charlotte Observer opined the biggest threat to North Carolina election integrity so far, it's McCrory. Still, despite this, today Governor McCrory officially requested a statewide recount, which he's entitled to if the difference, as expected, ends up being less than 10,000 votes. Due to the numerous challenges by the McCrory campaign, those results, originally scheduled for this Friday, are now expected sometime next week. But most independent observers believe Democrat Roy Cooper's lead would be very statistically hard to overcome. Roy Cooper has already declared victory and has even begun choosing members of his transition team. He accuses McCrory of doing everything he can to undermine the election.
We have won this race for governor. The people of North Carolina have made clear that they want a change of leadership in the governor's office. Governor McCrory is doing everything he can to undermine the results of this election and the will of the people, but we won't let him. We came out ahead on election day, And our margin of victory has only grown since then.
Beyond the uncertainty caused by a statewide recount, one that most independent experts say is unlikely to change the result, allies of the governor have also not ruled out using an obscure state law that allows a close and disputed election to be decided by the Republican-controlled legislature. And add to that, talk of Republicans potentially convening a special session to pack the state Supreme Court with 2 extra Republican justices after the election of an African-American justice on November 8th tipped the court's balance to the left. All of this has many North Carolinians crying foul, and some accusing Governor McCrory of trying to steal the election. Tonight, demonstrators have gathered outside the governor's mansion calling on him to concede. Judging by today's action, there seems little chance of McCrory doing that anytime soon. Oh, Carolina, watch this space.
Now check this out. This guy lost this damn election, okay, when he should have, I mean, he barely lost the election. He should have lost it by a lot more. The reason that he didn't lose this election by a lot more is because of voter suppression. I'm still compiling information, but I'm probably going to do a story on nationwide voter suppression. But suffice it to say that there were reports that African American vote in heavily populated states of African Americans was depressed by a minimum of 1% to 2%. 2% more African Americans voting in North Carolina would have blown McCrory out of the water. 2% more African American vote in states like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, and North Carolina, potentially North Carolina, would have made Hillary Clinton the president. Now, let me tell you why this guy basically is going to be thrown out of office by the voters. Yeah, it's true that he jumped up and down and tried to do all of this crap regarding voter suppression, but that in itself really didn't light a lot of fire under a lot of North Carolinians, though it did have some effect. What hurt him the most was when Charlotte, North Carolina came out with a bill that was designed to protect LGBT rights. Then this fool turns around, uses the legislature to write a bill that superseded Carolina's bill. Then along comes the transgender bathroom issue, which he was, in some opinions, on the wrong side of. Well, business is business. And a lot of businesses started making their displeasure known. And they started to, if not pull out of North Carolina, to make statements about doing business in North Carolina. And this started getting ridiculous. It was when the Attorney General weighed in and said that they could potentially withhold funds from, like, the University of North Carolina and various other universities throughout the state of North Carolina, that the pressure really started to mount. But the final nail in this guy's coffin was when the NCAA started pulling out championship games and Final Four basketball site locations. You can do a lot of things to the people of North Carolina, but when you start fucking around with North Carolina basketball, you've signed your own death warrant, and that's exactly what this guy did. Governor Pat McCrory, this could not have happened to a nicer person. And, there's one thing I did forget that really hurt him as well. When he shot down Obamacare and shot down the Medicaid expansion, that pissed a lot of his rural supporters off too, because hospitals started closing because of the lack of funds. And he and his legislature knew full well that if he had just accepted the Medicare portion of it, a bunch of those rural hospitals would have been able to stay open. So there was a lot of shit he threw on top of his own head, and it basically dripped all the way down to the point that he's history.